Estando contigo me olvido de todo y de mí.
And here we go. Yeah, I'm good.
I love the album.
Oh, thank you, Joey. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So before we get into the album, I'm curious, how did you survive COVID? It really did a deal with the jazz community. How did you get through it, and how does it feel to have an album out now?
Well, I haven't done an album in a long time because I've been busy doing other things,
Yeah.
and being guest here and playing with this guy and playing with the other. That I kind of took a sabbatical and doing, being a leader is like being a super of a building, you you got to take care of so many people and you know how that is. It's not easy. It's being a leader, but the whole thing started because my producer kept on saying, "Hey, you got to dedicate an album to your father because he was a great singer, and you have his DNA, and you have to pay tribute to a person like that who gave you his DNA, and you're a musician because of him,
Yeah.
But because of his death at 33 years old, I was only 9, and I never got to meet him. I felt like I abandoned, because I never got to meet the guy or a visit or anything. So, and plus, my mother and my grandparents never really spoke about him. They only told me that, hey, your father was a singer, but they never elaborated a lot. So I sort of grew up listening to music and of every kind you could ever imagine where I grew up in Puerto Rico, and sort of I zoomed in into music because it was part of who I was,
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later, till just recently, that I really got to know my father better because I started listening to him, and I said, "Wow, this guy can really sing. He is a great singer." And I've met some very unusual people down the pipeline just recently. Like there's a guy that's just about 90 years old who's in the Bronx who has a huge record store, right? And they even named the street under his name, Mike Amadeo Way, because he's actually history. He's the guy that's been there since the early 50s selling records to the community, and he still is.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I met this guy that said, you got to go over there to Amadeo because he knew your father in person and he could tell you stories about your dad, So I'm telling Rachel, hey, let's do it as soon as possible before he leaves this planet, So that's how the whole thing started. It was a Rachel telling me you got to, So finally we applied for a grant, and we didn't know if we were going to get it. And a couple of months later, we got an email that we got the grant. So the machine, it was like, obviously this has to happen,
Yeah.
And then the second thing that happened that was pretty auspicious, because she asked me, who do you want in the band? And I said, well, listen, I played just about with everybody that I could ever name of, but I haven't played with Gonzalo Rubalcaba. And he's like one of my heroes. And we said, oh, but you know what? That's going to cost us the entire grant. So we better forget about that for now, because he's a superstar and forget it.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, you're right. So a week passed. I get this call from John DeVerso, who's a very well-known musician.
Yeah.
And he's got 3 Grammy Awards. And he said, hey, Sammy, I want you to be part of my project. I said, okay, let's do it. And I'm no questions asked. I went to the studio and Gonzalo's there. So I said, I think I better do this record,
Yeah.
I didn't want to, get into the whole thing with him because I just met him. But by the 3rd day, he invited me to his birthday party, which I was very honored. And I went there And as the party is going on, and there's musicians there performing, and he's got a whole jam session in his house, and I jammed with him. And at the end, I said, "Hey, Gonzalo, man, I'm doing this project." And he just looked at me and said, "I'm doing it." I said, "But I haven't explained." I said, "It doesn't matter. I'm doing it." And I said, "Oh, okay." He says, "Sammy, whatever." He says, "I have a rule in my life that from now on, I'm only going to play with the people that I love." And I said, "Wow, that's a good rule. I love that." He says, "I've already done everything. And the best way to keep on playing is playing with the people that you love,
Yeah.
because you have more fun, and there's no problems, no issues, no egos, no insecurities. It's just a great vibe in the studio." And I love that philosophy. So he said yes. And then he said, "Hey, maybe you should get Aymée Nuviola." I said, "Holy shit, Aymée Nuviola. Wow." He said, "You think she'll do it?" She says, "Absolutely. I'll take care of it. I'll call her." And then we send her my father's music, and she called me back crying, crying. She said, "That voice of your father is incredible. I
Wow.
want to do those songs. I love those songs." And then that came up, and then John DeVersa came in, and then Miguel Zenon came in,
Wow.
and sort of, it was something that was very written in stone that this had to be done. So with the money, we went to Gonzalo's favorite studio, the Hit Factory in uh, in Miami, which is one of the most beautiful studios, and we were able to budget it so that we were able to record there. And once we were there, I mean, the rest is history. I mean, everything was magical. Everything, everything. Rachel did an altar for my father in the room,
Wow.
like with candles and a picture of my father. So every morning when we got there, we would all walk to my father's altar and say a prayer, and then we would start playing.
Wow. What
It
a
was pretty intense.
That's amazing. What a cathartic journey. You'd have to figure your father's spirit was there to magically pull all these people in to give you this dream ensemble. We're coming out of a pandemic. There just seems to be so many elements of this that are just like good therapy.
Yes, it was beyond therapy for me because I was in total denial. I really honestly didn't want to know anything about him. Because growing up as a child at 9 years old, and a kid seeing other kids with their fathers playing baseball, I would get so depressed. I would lock myself in the room, and I would go through and in those days there were no therapists.
Yeah, right.
There was no such thing as, "Hey, you got to go to," no, no, it was something that emotionally I had to go through my, and I couldn't talk to my mother about it because I was so ashamed. But years and years went by, and then I was 14, I was 15. My grandmother put me in music school to play trumpet. That didn't work out very well. And so I heard I heard Cal Jader. That was the first time I hear Cal Jader, right? On the radio and some station in Puerto Rico. And I said, "Oh my God, who's that? This is incredible." And it was Mongo and Willie Bobo and all those guys. And I said, "Who are those guys?" And so it was so incredible and intense. I said, "Man, I want to do that. I want to sound like that." And then my grandmother one day gave me $5. She said, "Hey, you know what? I want you to walk 5 blocks. There's a theater there, a real funky theater, and there's a group playing there. Go ahead and knock yourself out." I didn't know who it was, and I go in and I gave my $5, and it was Joe Cuba, you know. And Joe Cuba had just done his first album, Stepping Out, with Joe Feliciano. It was his first premiere in this little tiny theater. And when I saw that, it blew me away. I
Yeah.
said, "Now I really want to play percussion. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And and then the third thing that happened is there was a show called Jazz Scene USA with Oscar Brown Jr., who was a poet, back in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And the show obviously was transmitted to Puerto Rico, and that's where I saw Cal Tjader live with Bill Fitch, Bobby Ray, and all these guys, and I said, "Oh my God, it's destiny that I have to play that instrument," you know.
Yeah.
And
That was
so
so
that's how
good.
it started. Yeah, and
Yeah.
but the way that I started wasn't playing percussion. I was a vocalist, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
I sang in the hotels all over Puerto Rico, San Juan Hotel, Americana, and then I there was a show on TV called the Midday Show, right? And it was every day, and I was part of that show. I was the singer of the orchestra,
Yeah.
you know. But after I heard percussion, I didn't want to sing anymore,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know. I
Yeah.
just wanted to play, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I left Puerto Rico. I was about 19. I left with this horrible band. They were one of the worst. It was a cover band, you know, but they had a gig in New York City playing in this club for 2 months doing cover tunes. And this guy hired us. So I said, man, this is my free ticket to get out of here, you know? So I wound up in New York and the rest is history. I never came back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's been kind of the key to your evolution, your fire for loving what you do, being a musician and loving the music and taking care of it? What has been the key to all of these years of you doing that?
You know, I think that what happened was that when I was living in Puerto Rico, I was collecting records, right? I didn't have barely many friends, right? I was sort of the ugly duckling of the kids, you know. A girl, I couldn't get a date even if I tripped over a fence. Forget it. It was horrible. So I said, well, what am I going to do? So I started listening to a lot of records, you know, and buying tons of records. And every time I had a few dollars, I would go out and buy vinyl. And I would listen to this stuff. Chick Corea,
Yeah.
Herbie Hancock. I don't know why I went into that. Miles Davis. I was listening to Claire Fisher. All these kind of very sophisticated musicians, while everybody else was listening to the Beatles.
Yeah.
I was I was I was in total deep jazz, you know, world beat music, Brazilian, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I started soaking myself into all different kinds of genres, Brazilian, jazz, pop rock, this, the other. And I had all this collection of records. And then the other thing that got me out of the funk was uh, I had this idea of putting a record on, listening to a Chick Corea piano solo, and memorizing it with my voice, note by note. It didn't matter how fast it was. I would memorize the whole solo. So when friends would come over to my house, I would say, "Hey, check what I could do," you know, and I would sing a whole solo, and they would, their mouth would, "What? How did you do that?" You know, and it took me hours and weeks to learn all that, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just having fun, but little did I know that I was training my ear musically to really really understand rhythms, you know? And so that's how I got my way into New York. But when I got to New York, I worked at a record store for years. I worked at Sam Goody's selling records, you know, after I left that gig that I did with those cover, you know, band. I couldn't get a job as a musician, so I worked at a record store for many years. And I said,
Wow.
look, if I'm never going to become anything else, at least I'll be the greatest collector
Yeah.
in the world. But destiny always does something really funny. And then while I was selling records, Herbie Mann used to walk in the store, you know, the flautist,
Yeah.
and he would walk in there, and I was the guy that would help him.
Wow.
And and he would come once every 2 months to the store, and I would turn him on to music. And then by the maybe like 2 years later, he came in and he invited me to lunch. And while we're having lunch, he said, "Hey, kid, do you do anything musically besides collecting records? Because I love you. You're my friend now. But do you play anything?" I said, "As a matter of fact, I do. I play percussion." And he said, "Okay, that's all well and good, but do you play congas?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do." He said, okay, I got an idea. I'm playing at this club tomorrow night, and I want you to come and, come by and play with us. I said, oh, wow, this is crazy, And I went to the club with my congas. I had two congas. I went over there. I played. He didn't tell me who was playing. Place was packed. And then we played Manteca, the old tune Manteca. Yeah. And he gave me a solo, and the people started screaming, That was the first time I ever had people screaming while I was playing. and he says, this new kid, his name is Sammy Figueroa. You're gonna hear a lot about him because he doesn't know it, but he's joining my band. And I said, oh my God. He said it to the audience. Wow. He said, he's gonna be my new percussionist. I went, oh Lord. So after the gig, he says to me, listen, Sammy, I want you to quit your job and come with me. And I said, but Herbie, if I do that, I'm not going to have a job to come back to, And he said, don't worry about that. Where do you live now? And I said, well, I live in a hotel, the McAlpin Hotel. And all my salary goes to the hotel. He said, well, no, you're going to live with me now. And he lived in Park Avenue in this big penthouse,
Yeah.
I said, holy shit. So I went to his house and he shows me my room. And, my room at the hotel was a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
And here I am looking at this massive room with private bathroom and the whole deal. I said, I'm going to sleep here. He goes, yeah, that's your place. And I said, don't worry about it. Just stay here as long as you want until you get yourself on your feet.
Yeah.
And since you're going to go on tour with me, I said, wow. I went from Sam Goody's to Herbie's house, from Herbie's house to the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland. And then from Switzerland, I joined Average White Band. And it never stopped after that. He was like my godfather.
Yeah. That's amazing. What a great timeline trajectory. What an amazing journey you've had. Wow. And we've come to this point here. And what I would like everybody to know, where's the best place to pick this up, learn about any live shows, anything going on in your life?
Yes, I'm doing Dizzy's in New York, the 26th and 27th in September. And then we're doing the Kravis Center on October 7th. And with Gonzalo and all that. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm excited about this record because it's the first time I believe that I've sang in 35 years.
Wow.
I've never abused my voice for nothing. I've been playing. It might be more, 40 years,
Yeah.
And for my father, and because Rachel really, said to me, you gotta try. If it doesn't work, we'll get a singer.
Yeah.
But you gotta try. You gotta try. If it doesn't work, forget it. And I tried and it worked out. And I sing that beautiful song that my father sang. He sings like about 30 seconds of it. And then he fades out. And then I come in with the new version.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been so good, Sammy. Thank you so much for opening up about this project, giving us a portal into your world. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you for having me, Joey.
Yeah, absolutely.